39 lives lost, matching outfits, Nike sneakers, purple shrouds, a final meal, a mysterious drink, and a one-way ticket to the stars, or so they believed. How did a group of everyday people end up chasing a spaceship that was never there? And more disturbingly, could something like this happen again? Welcome to Crime Synth. In today's episode, we'll examine the tragic and perplexing case of Heaven's Gate, a group whose beliefs led to the devastating consequences in 1997. Together, we'll explore the dynamics of charismatic leadership, groupthink, and how powerful belief systems can influence ordinary individuals to make drastic decisions. Could social isolation, identity struggles, or economic factors contribute to such troubling outcomes? Most importantly, what can we learn to identify and address these warning signs early? Join us on this insightful journey as we synthesize crime, science, and society, empowering you with knowledge to ponder, discuss, and stay vigilant. In March 1997, police entered a mansion in Rancho Santa Fe, California, and found 39 bodies laid out in bunk beds, dressed alike, covered in purple shrouds, and prepared for what they believed was their departure from Earth. They were members of Heaven's Gate, a cult that saw death not as an end, but as a transition to a higher plane of existence aboard a spaceship trailing the Hale-Bopp comet. Heaven's Gate combined apocalyptic Christianity, New Age spirituality, and science fiction. Members believed Earth was a place to overcome their human flaws and prepare for ascension to the next level. That meant extreme self-discipline, celibacy, uniformity, emotional suppression, and total obedience. At the center was Marshall Applewhite, known as Do, a charismatic leader who claimed to be an extraterrestrial messenger. Alongside Bonnie Nettles, known as T, built a system where questioning doctrine meant spiritual failure. After Nettles' death, Applewhite reinterpreted their teachings. Now the body had to be shed for the soul to ascend. In the end, their faith in that belief system led to the largest mass event on US soil, and a haunting example of how social isolation and absolute authority can erode the very instinct to survive. 1972. Bonnie Nettles, a nurse with a keen interest in astrology, meets Marshall Applewhite, a music professor facing a personal crisis. This encounter sets the stage for a transformative journey, impacting not only just their lives, but eventually many others. By mid-1970s, they presented themselves as extraterrestrials in human form, mission to elevate a select group to a transcendent realm beyond our world. In the late 1970s to 1980s, the group expanded and secluded themselves. Members left their families, adopted new names, and committed to a life marked by celibacy, uniformity, and rigid discipline. In 1985, Nettles passed away due to cancer. This event unsettled the group as their beliefs did not anticipate such loss. Applewhite then proclaimed her soul had transcended to the next level despite her physical demise. The appearance of the Hale-Bopp comet in 1995 was seen by Applewhite as a cosmic invitation, heralding a spacecraft set to ferry them to their long-awaited next level. In March 1997, they orchestrated their graduation over 3 days. The 39 members calmly consumed a fatal concoction, each preparing for what they believed was their ascension. When investigators entered the Rancho Santa Fe mansion on March 26, 1997, they were met not with chaos, but with chilling order. There were no signs of forced entry, struggle, or violence. The residence was immaculately clean. Beds were neatly made. Personal items were carefully organized, and the entire environment appeared staged, ritualistic in its symmetry. The crime scene bore the hallmarks of a highly organized event. It was not impulsive, nor haphazard. This was a premeditated and psychologically complex act, resulting in the intentional loss of multiple lives. No erratic behavior, no signs of panic. The spatial arrangement in the bodies, uniform, intentional, strongly indicated staging. This level of coordination and compliance points to the extreme group cohesion and total psychological submission. The group carried out the act with remarkable coordination, raising complex questions about intent, belief, and psychological control. Toxicology reports from the San Diego County Medical Examiner's Office confirmed the presence of lethal doses of phenobarbital, a barbiturate sedative ranging from 28 to 164 micrograms per milliliter. For reference, anything over 100 micrograms is considered fatal. The drug was likely mixed into pudding or applesauce and then washed down with vodka. Most bodies also showed blood alcohol content, consistent with intoxication, which would have helped dull the effects of the sedatives. Some victims also had traces of hydrocodone, a powerful painkiller, as well as acetaminophen. A few showed low levels of other substances like butalbital, suggesting access to prescription drugs, potentially from multiple sources. Plastic bags were found over many of the victims' heads, but there was no indication of restraint or force. There were no defensive wounds, and no trauma was present on any of the bodies. Fingerprints collected throughout the residence confirmed the identities of the deceased and matched those on file from personal records or previous group documents. No unknown prints were found, reinforcing the conclusion that no outside party was involved. DNA evidence showed no signs of struggle, assault, or foul play. All biological material recovered was consistent with the residents of the house. Authorities found an abundance of pre-recorded videotapes, feral messages, and written statements, meticulously labeled, dated, and stacked. The videos featured members calmly explaining their decision to exit their human containers, often smiling, some visibly excited about their impending ascension. Notebooks, checklists, and logs meticulously recorded the group's final days, providing insight into the planning and psychological state leading up to the tragic event. In one log, the group detailed the timing of the doses down to the hour, and there were no signs of coercion in these materials, only conviction. To many observers, the event appeared as a large-scale tragedy or an unusual collective departure. However, a closer analysis of the situation reveals deliberate coordination and clear intentionality. This was not an impulsive act driven by fear or confusion, but by deeply held convictions. From the perspective of Heaven's Gate members, their actions did not symbolize an end, but rather a transformation, something they specifically referred to as graduation toward a higher existence. Behind the calm facade lay an intensely regulated environment shaped over decades by psychological influence, emotional isolation, and unwavering obedience to a charismatic authority figure. The underlying tragedy wasn't solely in the act itself, but in the comprehensive conditioning that convinced members this drastic members was their only viable path forward. What we observed here is a psychological phenomenon known as folie à plusieurs, a French term translated to shared delusion. It describes a rare condition where two or more closely connected individuals adopt the same irrational beliefs or perceptions. Typically, this occurs when a dominant individual's beliefs spread within a group, reinforced through mental dependency, isolation, and strong interpersonal ties. Marshall Applewhite, a charismatic yet deeply vulnerable, following the passing of his partner Bonnie Nettles, experienced a psychological conflict known as cognitive dissonance. To resolve this conflict, he restructured the group's doctrine so that the physical departure became seen as rational, even desirable. Cognitive dissonance is a psychological concept introduced by Leon Festinger in 1957. It refers to the mental discomfort experienced when an individual simultaneously holds contradictory beliefs, values, and behaviors. Individuals typically resolve cognitive dissonance by adjusting their beliefs or perceptions, justifying their behavior or attitudes, reducing the significance of the conflict. Essentially, cognitive dissonance motivates the mind to restore internal psychological consistency. Applewhite's teachings, fully embraced by his followers, initially emphasized the belief that members would physically ascend to a higher level of existence together without experiencing physical departure. Nettles was not only his partner but co-leader, representing divine authority. However, in 1985, Nettles succumbed to illness, directly contradicting the group's foundational belief. Applying cognitive dissonance theory, the doctrine clearly stated no physical departure was necessary. Transformation would occur visibly. Nettles' passing contradicted this claim. This triggered profound psychological discomfort not just for Applewhite, but for the entire group, since their leader had experienced a physical departure which is inconsistent to their beliefs. Applewhite restructured the group's beliefs to interpret Nettles' passing as a planned transition, a graduation to a higher existence. He declared that physical bodies were merely temporary vehicles meant to be discarded. This reframing served two crucial purposes. It preserved the group's core belief by reinterpreting the event rather than abandoning the entire doctrine. It reinforced Applewhite's authority, establishing him as the sole interpreter of spiritual truth, even amid contradictory evidence. This scenario provides a clear illustration of belief, perseverance, and cult psychology, demonstrating how cognitive dissonance can be leveraged to deepen group cohesion and commitment. To understand how 39 people calmly prepared for their final actions, we need to look beyond beliefs and instead examine systems of control. Sociologist Irving Goffman introduced the concept of the total institution in his influential 1961 work, Asylums. Operationally, a total institution is defined as a closed, self-contained social systems in which individuals live isolated from broader society, which nearly every aspect of daily life is regulated by a singular authority. Examples include prisons, psychiatric hospitals, military camps, and relevant to this discussion, certain groups or cult-like organizations. The key characteristics of total institutions: physical and social isolation from external society, highly regulated routines, meals, sleep, work, and social interactions managed under centralized authority, erosion of individual identity through uniforms, renaming, or enforced conformity, clear separation from the outside world, restricting or eliminating contact with family, friends, and external media, constant surveillance and enforced discipline, often maintained through peer monitoring or institutional controls. Applying this framework to Heaven's Gate, within Heaven's Gate, members lived entirely isolated from external society. They severed ties with families, friends, and media, fully immersed in the reality crafted by Applewhite and the doctrine he controlled. Using Goffman's model helps explain how Heaven's Gate established a self-contained social reality where alternative perspectives were virtually non-existent, and obedience became existentially necessary. Over time, prolonged exposure to this isolated system resulted in deep internalization of the group's ideology, until eventually, within its constructed reality, members perceive the concept of a self-chosen departure as rational, even inevitable. Unlike many groups that attract members experiencing financial stability, Heaven's Gate primarily drew individuals from stable, middle-class backgrounds with higher education. By the mid-1990s, the group even managed a successful web design business known as HireSource. However, financial stability did not necessarily translate into emotional or existential fulfillment. Scholar Benjamin Zeller, author of Heaven's Gate, America's UFO Religion, emphasizes that these individuals were not generally unstable or lacking education. Rather, they were actively seeking community and purpose, attracted to a structured environment that provided meaning amid what they perceived as an increasingly chaotic and alienating world. Under US law, voluntarily taking one's own life is considered a personal decision deeply rooted in individual autonomy. Unless clear evidence of coercion, deception, or force is established, such an act typically isn't classified as criminal. In the case of Heaven's Gate, investigators found no indication of physical coercion. There were no restraints or visible signs of violent force, and each member left behind videos or written statements clearly expressing their decisions. Their actions appeared calm, intentional, and voluntary. Because of this, Marshall Applewhite, despite having influenced the actions of 39 individuals, was never legally held accountable. Applewhite wasn't viewed as directly responsible for their loss of life. Rather, he was considered to have made the same decision as those who followed him. Yet this scenario raises critical ethical questions. Can consent genuinely be considered free when shaped by prolonged isolation and intensive indoctrination? Should there be legal responsibility when group influence leads individuals to irreversible decisions? It is easy to oversimplify Heaven's Gate as a bizarre anecdote. Nike sneakers, UFOs, purple coverings. But this perspective overlooks the deeper human tragedy involved. These weren't merely eccentric individuals, they were real people. Sons, daughters, close friends, siblings. Many were thoughtful, educated individuals simply searching for clarity and purpose in an increasingly confusing world. They encountered a system offering them structure, belonging, and meaning. Yet ultimately, it was this very structure that led them to irreversible consequences. The essential question isn't merely why they believed, but rather why such belief systems become appealing to many people. What gaps exist in our culture, communities, and mental health frameworks that make individuals vulnerable to extreme ideologies? And importantly, how do we safeguard those we care about from these influences? This case compels us to ask critical questions. What occurs when belief itself becomes restrictive? When the promise of purpose compromises individual autonomy? In today's age of online echo chambers, conspiracy theories, and influential figures, how far away might we be from witnessing something similar again? If you found this exploration thought-provoking, subscribe for more deep dives into true crime through the lens of science and psychology. Share your perspective in the comments. Was this case primarily driven by psychological influence or a tragic expression of personal autonomy? This has been Crime Synth. We'll see you in the next episode. Until then, remember, asking why isn't always comfortable, but it matters.